We are interviewing Jonathan A. Franklin, who has held the position of Associate Law Librarian at the University of Washington Gallagher Law Library since 2001. Prior to that, Jonathan served as Assistant Librarian for Library Services from 1999 to 2001, and he also served as Acting Law Librarian for several months during 2006. Jonathan, let's begin with a little personal history. Could you tell us a little bit about what your life was like when you were young and perhaps like it is today?
Sure. When I was young, I grew up in Northern California, in San Francisco and in Palo Alto, basically Portola Valley, and had a great time. I mean, a wonderful supportive family, one sister, academic father. I grew up around art. I was exposed to Gilbert and Sullivan at a young age, and San Francisco is a great place to grow up, so that was wonderful. And then I went away to high school, and then from there to college and beyond, and here I am in Seattle. So I've been incredibly fortunate. Family, 2 kids, now 14 and 18, heading off to high school and college, and couldn't be happier.
You mentioned earlier today when we were at lunch with the group that your daughter, the older of your children, is off to college in the next year and may go down to California for school.
Yes.
So maybe sort of a return to the family.
Exactly, the loop begins again.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Could you tell us a little bit about your own background in terms of your professional training, your experience and
Sure.
degrees, that sort of thing?
Well, it's funny because if you look back in time, a lot of what I did feeds into librarianship and law librarianship particularly, even though I didn't even know it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Stanford as an undergrad, and I was majored in a program called Values, Technology, Science, and Society. It was kind of a semi-independently designed major. And there I wrote papers on movie colorization, for example. And I didn't know that there was such a thing really as copyright. I just thought it was interesting that somebody could come along and colorize a movie. And is that the same as the original? And sort of these puzzles. And I also did some work in anthropology and got my master's in anthropology at the same time. And that taught me really how to deal with people, even though it came from the art side, but also dealing with people and observing people and being a bit more thoughtful in interactions, I would say. So those two, then I graduated from college and looked at what was around, what were the possibilities. And at that point, I did some computer work. And degree-wise, so I had a master's in anthropology, but I wasn't going to go do field work. I'd met my wife as a senior in college, and we were sticking together. So we traveled for a year after college together and saw a tremendous swath of the world with backpacks and on buses and the like. And then came back to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, she was a paralegal for a law firm downtown, and I had this computer programming gig, I would call it, for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
So during that year, we had these complex situations where, for the first part, it was creating video discs for Apple. And that worked very well because it was with a Stanford professor. And we then had these were the huge silver platters that are hard to find right now. And then for the rest of the year, I was working for an art dealer in Brussels, scanning images of auction catalogs. This was the era where scanners were not color.
Mm-hmm.
They were black and white. They were very, very blocky images, and you had to physically pull the scanner over the page to make the image. It was a thunder scan. And this was, they were understandable images. You could interpret what they were, but you couldn't, nothing like the quality that we have today. And I'd started working with Christie's images because I'd worked at Christie's beforehand. And then I got to Sotheby's images, but we didn't have the rights to use the Sotheby's images. And that was the first time the light bulb went on. Oh my goodness, this area, a lot of things that I've been doing all kind of line up. And at that point, my wife being in law, we were talking about law school in general. And that's largely what led to law school. At that point, I had an extraordinary time. I was at Stanford again, and so was Louise. And there was a Lexis and Westlaw room. And basically what happened is there was a room where you could go in, you could type in search terms, and it would give you information.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this wonderful combination because I had the computer's curiosity about computers. And I had this interest in information. Now, it wasn't purely legal information. I would look up anything, right? Because there were all those great news databases as well. And it wasn't cabin, news, law, and it was integrated. And so you could go do search on a case and then go look up something you're interested in of another sort. Like, what did the New York Times have on this or that topic? And I owe a lot of it to Iris Wildman at Stanford. So Iris was the first person who probably saw me logging hours there. I don't know if they got a spreadsheet of who spent the most time on Lexis and Westlaw, but I was using it quite a bit for both education and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so she said to me, "Oh, have you considered law librarianship?" Sort of the typical approach. I was a 1L. I didn't say anything. I didn't really think about it at all, right? But she's the one who planted the seed. And then I spent my first summer clerking for a wonderful district court judge. And then I spent my second summer doing copyright work as an attorney. Mm-hmm. And this was doing things like reading Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle licensing contracts. This is what I thought I wanted to do, right? And it sounds very glamorous, but really it's a lot more tedious than I realized. The practice of law wasn't quite what I'd expected in terms of grappling with big, deep issues on a regular basis and getting paid for it. In my second year, I was talking to Iris again and Paul Lomeo, and I met Mike Jacobstein a few times. Mm-hmm. But he had a separate office, so it was harder to run into him in a casual way. But what happened is my wife got a clerkship, a federal clerkship up here in Seattle with Judge Fletcher. Mm-hmm. And so then I was like, well, what am I going to do for a year in Seattle after law school? And my father mentioned that there's this great law librarianship program up in Seattle. And so then what Iris had told me, what Paul had told me, my interest in copyright, and there's a funny aside about that, because in copyright class, my professor was very much interested in the protection of intellectual property and the content industries. And what I had found was that I was more interested in the use of information. So that also fed into this, and it all kind of flowed. And I still have this orange piece of paper on which I'd written law librarianship as one of the main things to explore. And that's really what brought me to the profession, was this convergence of Paul and Iris and my father and Paul Goldstein and things I'd done that I had no idea related to law librarianship.
That's interesting. I noticed in your background that while you were at Stanford, you also were a general manager of the radio station on the campus, which sort of intrigued me.
Yeah.
So that sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah. Radio has been a part of my life, or was a part of my life, through high school and college. And I think it also plays into this because, well, first of all, you're in a content industry, and you're meeting artists, and you're hearing about recording contracts. You're interviewing people. You're then also managing a staff and coordinating a staff. Mm-hmm. And actually, when you look back on it, creating a radio schedule of which DJs are at which times playing what music is very similar to scheduling a reference desk. Mm-hmm. Or any other type of
or a circulation
operation,
desk.
Or a circulation desk, as the case may be, exactly.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of those, learning how to manage actually came quite early, and I'll admit to not being a student of books on management, but very much interested in keeping an organization running and focused. And so I just found overall I was surrounded, one of the great things about a volunteer organization like a campus radio station is everyone wants to be there.
Mm-hmm.
right? They're all interested in their own particular niche, but they want to be there. And so it makes it easy to form sort of a very coherent organization.
Do you ever listen to the radio stations, say, over the internet now? from
Yes,
down
I
there?
do.
Yeah. One of my favorite radio stations in the morning, they played the kind of music I like, but I've gotten to know the personalities, is a station out of San Francisco, and I hear it streamed on the internet.
Yeah.
I feel so empowered being able to do this.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can listen to a radio station that you worked at and hear sort of the music. And now what's amusing is also that that music is coming back around. Right? So the things that we heard the first time are now cool in a retro sort of way. So again, the timing works, both in having children listening to the same thing that you listen to, but them not realizing that you have 30 years of history with it.
And better to make them think it's their idea.
Yeah.
And not old dad's
Absolutely,
idea.
Yeah, no.
Oh. Well, it sounds like you had quite an interesting life, first in California, and then you came here to Seattle and ended up going through Penny Hazelton's program at the university. But then I noticed that you were off, at least somewhat east, to Michigan, was it?
Yeah, it was Michigan.
Where you were at the law library. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you ended up ultimately coming back out here to Seattle?
Absolutely. So I started the program. It was a wonderful year. I learned a great deal. Penny's been an amazing mentor, obviously, for the last 20 years. So she's been essential to a lot of everything that's happened professionally. I came to the program. I didn't really know after this what we were going to do, because my wife's 1-year clerkship and the 1-year law librarianship program. And so I think there was a vague discussion about having kids and a family and things of that sort, but it really wasn't anything tangible. At that point, one of the first job ads that came out was Margaret Leary posting for an opening at the University of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And it was the foreign law position. And I had exposure to foreign people. I had exposure to foreign law from John Merriman and the civil law tradition. I had not extraordinary language proficiency. So I went out there and I gave an interview, and lo and behold, everything worked out. It was incredible because I really hadn't imagined where I would be next. Mm-hmm. But going to Michigan was an unbelievable experience for a couple reasons. It had a phenomenal collection, an amazingly well-run library with an emphasis on service to the faculty. Mm-hmm. Ann Arbor's a fantastic place. And I got a lot of collection development experience there. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, some of the focus of this program has been, it's been all around librarianship, but a lot of reference. And there I found myself doing a lot of collection development, thinking about the collection as a whole, how things fit together, work on collection development policy and things like that. And so it was great. I was there for basically 5 years. And as I think is natural with the mentor-mentee relationship, at ALL I would have lunch or talk to Penny occasionally, each year. Mm-hmm. And what happened is basically that Penny came, we had breakfast. And Penny's always about 3 steps ahead. So Penny knew that Vicki Moore was going to be retiring, and Vicki Moore had run much of this library, a lot of the organization, the structure, the files, the day-to-day aspects. Vicki had a hand in, and really, what Penny was looking for was somebody to step in, fill Vicki's shoes, and perhaps do other stuff as needed. Mm-hmm. And that's why I had that wonderful job title, Assistant Librarian for Library Services, which basically means jack of all trades, mm-hmm. and master of whatever Penny wants. So she offered me this opportunity to return to Seattle, and my wife's only sister is in Seattle, and they're sort of like, well, why not? Mm-hmm. It was hard to resist, I would have to say, so I didn't. And at that point, I stepped into this situation where I was to do what was needed during this transition. And there were a few things that were made it particularly tempting. So there was the new building. A lot of work had been put into the new building when I arrived. So part of what I was doing was maybe not finishing it up, but at least looking at things on a level of detail that isn't, where are the plugs going to be, how is the library going to be laid out, consulting with, Penny ran the show, but I was sort of sometimes doing some of the stuff that was more nitty-gritty, let's say. So there was that. There were parts of the Vicki Moore's job that really needed ongoing management and supervision. She left everything in unbelievably organized condition, so it was incredibly easy to step into. But it was sort of supervising things like the building coordinator, payroll, which is one of the most important functions there is, and a variety of other things. And then slowly over the last 12 years, it's morphed. It's continued to change, sort of as the needs of the institution have changed.
Well, you
So
know,
that's how I found my way back here.
It's sort of interesting in hearing you describe what you do, especially the last 12 years or so here with Penny Hazelton as your director. You are, maybe I shouldn't give this much away publicly, but, I was a director for 30 years. And you really find having a deputy, no matter what you call that person, the associate librarian, whatever, I had one of those for a very long time, and it was wonderful. I mean, essentially, he took care of things that never came to my plate as a result. And the kind of detail, I mean, you mentioned the new building. Think of what it would be like if you didn't have enough data jacks in that era, and now at least electric jacks, because they haven't yet come up with a battery that's that good. Maybe we have Wi-Fi and so on, and the next generation of Wi-Fi is coming that will have connecting speeds that are, basically faster than most of our internet suppliers can come up with now. But it'll all eventually catch up.
Well, it's amazing. When we built this building, we have a lot of conduit in the building because wireless wasn't really prevalent. So we didn't know what happens if Wi-Fi doesn't work.
That's right.
So there's all this empty conduit inside this building in case it hadn't worked.
Well, we built a building about a little tiny bit ahead of you, but we also had Ethernet pulled, and we had data plugs in quite a few of the library seats. Not all of them by any matter of means, but I remember going down on an American Bar Association site visit for accreditation to Williamsburg, Virginia, Jim Heller's shop at William and Mary, and they had Wi-Fi. And I was, as you do on those things, you kind of walk around unescorted through the library. It makes everybody around you nervous, but you do it. And I was watching a young lady working with the Wi-Fi on her laptop, and so I stopped and I started talking to her about it. And so she gave me a demonstration of how wonderful it really was. So immediately when I got home, I was talking to the dean. I said, "We got to get some of that." And of course we did, as everybody did, and eliminated the need for this. But as you said earlier, you were looking at detail in that building, like, is there a lot of electric plugs? And so many places it was still the old-fashioned, maybe one or two to a room. And you go to some places where you see cords all over the floor and people trying to plug in. So they can power all their new equipment.
We didn't even have all the auxiliary jacks for your cell phone and your MP3 player, or whatever the case may be.
I noticed indeed part of the fruits of, I think, your eye in this room, because here we are at the Gallagher Library in one of the conference rooms, and normally I have a long extension cord to power all the equipment around here, the lights and the camera.
Sure.
And there's so many plugs, I just put the lights directly into the one right nearby, and the camera is on a longer cord, but that's just because I did it that way. Out of habit, I think. Plus it has a surge suppressor, and I wanted to protect the circuitry just in case. But it's interesting, that kind of detail. So you have had what it sounds like is a very fascinating career, both before you came and especially now the last dozen years or so here with the university.
Yeah.
I always used to think that the people with the most interesting jobs in the place, one was the director, but then I was prejudiced. But a good associate or deputy director's got to have the same kind of job, because you take care of whatever happens that you don't always know in advance, so it isn't so structured.
It's true. I think things have gotten so complicated. I can do dishwasher repair. I can fix the towel dispenser and replace toner cartridges. But the complexity of the ILS now, as we're migrating from Millennium and III to this new Ex Libris Alma, I can't understand it all. I mean, it's become an elephant too large for any person.
Yeah. Well, we all used to say this even about the old stuff when it first came in, so you'll figure it out.
It feels like a larger elephant, let's say.
Well, it probably is. Get it, use it a while, and you'll never figure out how you ever lived without it.
I'm only hoping.
Yeah. Well, you have done a lot of things besides here at the university and in other jobs, and you've served our profession in many diverse and important ways. For example, I noted in your background that you've been chair of several committees, and essentially been a stalwart member of the Copyright Committee. You and Lolly Gassaway in her day in that. And you've played also an active role in the work of the Foreign, Comparative, and International Special Interest section of AALL, and served as president even of the Asian American Law Librarians Caucus. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of your professional involvement outside of the library in particular, including, if you have anything you want to mention, perhaps in the General University, because many of us have done a bit of that in the past.
There is definitely...
One sort of gets drafted into
I think once you get known on some level, then either you do begin to get drafted. So there are, early on, I think even before I was in the program here, so it was Boston, it was sweltering in 1993. I went to the annual meeting. Before entering the program, I went to the Copyright Committee meeting, just because, wow, it's open, you can sit in, I love this stuff. So then by the next year, when I put in my little slip to volunteer for committees, my number was pulled.
You got the short straw.
Exactly. Well, in my perspective, that was the long straw, but yeah, I'll hear what you say.
I agree with you, it really is. I like to have my name get used, submitted, and accepted.
And so that worked out very well, and I learned a lot very quickly about what the Libraries Association, ALL, but also the broader library associations were doing. And that was tremendously helpful, because you're working with the GRC, I was working with Mary Alice Bache, all of these sorts of things to see how things are done, and that was incredibly educational. At the same time, because my job was foreign and comparative selector at the University of Michigan, it was natural to get involved with the foreign materials. And there, the learning curve was much steeper. So you surround yourself with experts who've been in the profession, you know, the Tom Reynolds and the Dan Wades and all those folks, and you just soak it up. So the more you can be around those people and the more you can learn, the things that are obvious to them are brand new to you. And so that was really an incredibly rich part of my education as a law librarian, but also meeting just a lot of people who'd been doing it for a long time. Learning, for example, about the Eastern European emigres who had been the previous generation of foreign and comparative law librarians, and that sort of tradition that was being continued. At the same time, I did get involved. There were various things here, so whether it was on a committee to evaluate a dean, or various library committees more broadly, because we have such a large library system here, I did work in that. I've also gotten involved with ALA and some of the intellectual property issues surrounding the library community in general. I've been helped by a MacArthur grant to attend WIPO meetings, World Intellectual Property Organization meetings in Geneva, through that to represent libraries as a whole. And then recently also got to work on the annual meeting program committee which was wonderful, just to see all the ideas that the membership could come up with and trying to deliver on that. So it's been incredibly rewarding and also an opportunity to give back that I hope will continue.
Well, it sounds like you have had a long and good positive track record of doing some of that giving back.
I hope so.
But you've also, with all this other stuff you've been involved in, you also write and have written quite a bit of material. You want to talk a little bit about that,
Sure.
and perhaps if you have any views on whether that's good or bad or for others?
I think it's great. I will say, though, that after having come into this position, my writing really fell off as one of the things that was wonderful about being at the University of Michigan and as a student is that you do have a lot of control over your own time. You know when you're going to be on the desk. You know when you're going to be selecting materials or reviewing the materials you selected. What that means is that you can really carve out time to write. When I returned here, my time got kind of fragmented because there's always something that needed to be done that was more important than writing. And so I've tried to keep up, both with, and I think I got a wonderful piece of advice early on, and I can't remember who gave it to me, so I apologize, but it was to alternate, sort of try to do something legal, something librarian, something legal, something librarian. And I've tried to stick to that, so you're keeping in touch with what your patrons want, the legal side of things, but you're also keeping in touch with what are the new ideas in librarianship, what are the new services to deliver, what are the trends, things like that. And particularly with the building of the new building, I had this natural hook with bricks and bytes and architecture and things like that. So I've tried to keep writing in those two areas while I keep learning more and more as the world shifts under our feet.
Well, certainly on that, I want to touch on another subject that we chatted briefly about before we started the interview, and that is what the future looks like, in your opinion, for law librarians and law libraries and so on. Because essentially, we may be on the beginning edge of a sea change in education in general, and specifically including legal education. I think the term is distance learning and that sort of thing. I know that our profession, at least our law profession, resisted it for a long time, but even they are beginning to come across and adapt some of this new technology and techniques. That sort of leads me to sort of wonder, with your sort of background in technical things and your background in scholarly things and in library things, where do you think, what do you think the future might look like for us as a profession? I mean, I know this sets you up for all sorts of things, and people look at this recording in a few years and say, "What a damn fool! It didn't ever work out that way." But it might.
Yeah.
You got any
I
thoughts?
think you have to take your shot, right?
Yeah, give it a try if you want to.
So, there are so many competing tensions right now. First of all, legal practice is changing in terms of people going out and assuming that they're all going to make $190,000 at a firm in Manhattan. So the attraction of law school is decreasing in terms of the number of LSAT takers. There's been a lot of discussion of MOOCs, these massively open online courses that people are teaching. The question right now is, well, if one person, this was discussed 20 years ago, if one person sits at Harvard and communicates to all 200 law schools, does that mean that 199 common law profs are out of business? I'm not going to say that that's the case, because pedagogically I don't think that's the best way to learn. But I think there are economic pressures on the profession, both of legal academia and law libraries. At the same time, there's also a new pressure towards making lawyers practice ready, and more of a skills experiential focus. And I do think that librarians have a critical role to play there. So while there may be tensions in the doctrinal courses, there are some courses where you need to give students hands-on experience. and you need to give them feedback. It's maybe not as easy as teaching in terms of standing up, delivering, and then grading an exam. But I think it ultimately can be rewarding and build the connections that people often have with their law school library. And I can hope that if we retain that ability to connect to our students, the ability to serve our faculty, that we will be in a good, if different, position from where we are now. That's my hope.
Well, I think it's one that many share. I know I certainly do, even though I'm now retired and I guess a little bit less skin in this game at this point.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to watch the changes, and I appreciate your take on what you think may be coming next and where we ought to be headed with it. Sort of with that, Jonathan, would you like to, before we conclude, is there anything that you'd like to talk about in addition to what we've already discussed?
Sure. I think this is an amazing time to be a law librarian, I mean, as well as to be a professional, because we've looked the history of ALL and the history of law librarianship from the start. It's extraordinary to watch the progression of it as a professionalization, the change in directors, right, from just leaving library school and becoming a director to the longer trajectory, this discussion of the graying of the profession combined with the fact that, well, what is the profession really going to look like? Mm-hmm. So I think it's both fascinating to watch history, but also to wonder as we sit here, are we as part of that cycle? Is it going to repeat itself, or is this really something different? And I don't know, but it's certainly, I love being part of this series and being offered the opportunity to share my ideas, because I do think we're at a moment in time where really no one knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think that is probably extremely honest and accurate. We just don't really know. And in a number of these interviews, I've asked somewhat the same question: where do you think the profession may be headed? And you do get different reads on that. And, who knows?
Yeah.
Your guess is certainly as good as any, I think, and maybe more accurate than most.
I don't know.
Who knows? We'll see. Or at least those who will look back in a few years.
Right. I mean, I don't know if all academic law libraries are going to be served from a consortium in India, or if we're all going to be on video chat from home and we have an Oxford shirt on the waist up and pajama bottoms.
Yeah, well, that's the way I sort of work, or could if I want to do, since I've retired.
Yeah. So, it'll just be extraordinary.
I mean, who would have guessed 20 years ago, when we were still basically collecting books and periodicals and so on, that something like Hein Online would come along that eliminated, or at least for some of us, the need to have some of these titles in paper in our libraries and pay to house them.
It's incredible.
And worry about the old ones deteriorating from acid in the paper and so on. Or some of the stuff Google is doing, and others, to digitalize more and more of the treatises even. I mean, it presents all sorts of new possibilities. And I suppose some scary trade-offs, but still.
Well, for example, on the most micro level, today we were talking about label printing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth printing labels for periodicals that are going to be bound, or other things like that? Is it, I don't know, is it worth checking in serials? Or because they're in Hein Online, these are really just print backups? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, so we just all make our best guesses, and we're all trying different things, and we'll see what happens.
And I suppose some of our colleagues have decided, is it worth even getting the subscription, since
Fair
I
enough.
do have Hein Online and it's there.
Well, astonishingly, and when we actually talked about that, is it would take almost more effort to cancel them all and determine the logistics of how we do this, that, and the other thing, than at least for a couple of years to keep it going, because law periodicals are so inexpensive compared to many others. If we were in neuroscience, they'd probably been gone ages ago.
And I imagine the copyright people would have taken care of anyone who didn't want to buy a subscription.
Exactly. You'd be paying as much in as you did in paper for the electronic version, that's for sure.
I've noticed that when I've tried to find certain things online that are available only on sort of pay-per-view. I don't mean movies either. I mean books and
Right.
articles. Some of the
Right.
fees for printing it out are fairly hefty. Yeah.
Well, as legal publishers merged, they took on debt, and they have to figure out some way to pay off the debt. So, you know.
Tell me about that. I mean, I remember when Thompson bought West Publishing, which is, I guess, now Reuters. And, you know, we looked at the dollars involved in that,
Yeah.
you know, what was public, and it was just mind-boggling. And we all looked at that and said, oh boy, prices are going to have to go
Yeah,
up
exactly.
because they got to get that money back somehow.
Yeah.
And I think someone had done a cost analysis based on what little we could figure out that the old company had been making per year. And it was like 17 or 18 years before they even broke even on that purchase. And we didn't think they wanted to wait that long.
Yeah.
Not Lord Thompson and his crew. Well, certainly, Jonathan Franklin, I appreciate you talking to us this afternoon. And, you know, you've treated me well today. I've enjoyed coming here to the university to visit you. You even gave me a nice day out here in the weather. Although I don't live very far away, so I can't exactly give you all the credit for that. But I do appreciate, and I want to thank you again for talking to us this afternoon.
Thank you for taking the time to set this up and organize it, and thanks to Hein for putting it up.
Thank you.
Great.